Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, future young leaders of the world, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. When I was told that the theme for this forum was boundaryless organizations, the first and only thought that came to my mind was people. You see, boundaries are limitations. And creating a boundaryless organization begins with freeing your employees from the shackles of traditional means of doing business. But when we look at an organization or a business as a whole, what is it that really drives a business? Some would say market share. Perhaps it's understanding your consumers' needs and wants. Quality? Profit? Of course, can't survive without it. But what drives all of those things? What is it that truly defines a boundaryless organization? Your people. It is all about the people. It's all about what we say to each other. In my view, marketing is more about what we say to our people than what we say to the public. Why? Because it drives our culture. And I'll talk about culture in a little while. So who touches customers? Me? I'm lucky if I meet 10 people. I'm busy at corporate headquarters doing whatever it is that I do. Sometimes even I don't know where my day disappears. The people that define an organization are the people who touch its customers. It is how you convert a building of steel, glass, and concrete into a warm and inviting hotel. When terror struck at the Taj Hotel in Mumbai in 2008, it was the Taj people that everyone spoke about. They'd forgotten about the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, and the 600 thread count bed linen, because those things wouldn't save their lives. It was the Taj people, their acts of bravery and selflessness, all driven by a Taj culture drawn from the ancient Indian values of Atithi Devo Bhava, the guest is God. That saved those lives. So you know what really works? Creating spaces for human aspiration, like this. Let people aspire to reach dizzying heights in your organization. In fact, why go that far? Let yours be a space that people aspire to be a part of. So aspirational that they're willing to get on an airplane and travel long distances to be a part of your organization. Even take off their shoes and belts at security checkpoints. A few years ago, I was attending one of our board meetings, and joining us was the Coca-Cola CEO, Global. We had a wonderful evening, and as it was winding down, he asked me which flight I was taking home to Dubai, as he too was flying Emirates via Dubai and connecting to Atlanta. When we realized that he was on an earlier flight and I was going to miss him, we bid a fond farewell and made plans to catch up again. Imagine my surprise when I found him at the airport the next morning. "You guys made me drink too much. I missed my flight," is what he said. He then recounted the horrifying tale of how, because it's the weekend in Atlanta and no one is working at his office, he had to speak to the airlines himself to rebook all his connecting flights. It took him hours, and something he hadn't done himself for years. Before we took off, I called my assistant Catherine in Dubai, and I asked her to meet me the moment I land, because an idea had clicked. Now, to continue the story, I need to tell you about Catherine. So when I was with the United Nations, Kathy was my assistant there. When I left, for reasons that are very simple, Shashi Tharoor was my boss, mentor, best friend at the United Nations, and Shashi ran for Secretary General of the United Nations, wasn't very successful. Ban Ki-moon became Secretary General, so we had to all go. Simple. In going, we decided to do something different. Shashi decided to become a politician, I decided to become a businessman. Both rather successfully, I'd like to say. Kathy stayed with me and has stayed with me all these years. She started, as I said, as my assistant. When I started my company with $50,000, which were my savings from the UN 8 years ago, she was my only employee. She then became my chief assistant, because we then had 8, because I started getting busier. Then she became my travel coordinator, because you see, when I travel, and I travel 26 days a month, I don't always make it on time. And then they have to change things around and change hotels and change cars and change meetings, and it becomes a bit of a nightmare. I also travel with a small army of people, and so that becomes a bigger nightmare. But then as the company grew, and it grew, and we reached 136 companies within the group, spread across 32 countries, employing 17,000 people, we suddenly realized we need a travel department within the company. And so Kathy went on to become the head of the travel department. So you can see her graph, very interesting. She started off, as I said, as my assistant, and ended up heading up the travel division for the entire company. When I met Kathy that night, after spending time with the Coca-Cola CEO, I realized a gap had formed. You see, if someone as important as the CEO of a global company like Coca-Cola cannot get on a flight because he's missed it, because his office is closed, that showed me a gap, a segment in the market that we could tap. So I packed up Kathy and I sent her to Chicago. And it cost me $170,000 to set her up there with an office, with her staff, and we created a boutique corporate travel agency to cater to the needs of executives like the ones that we were talking about. I had the advantage of having 32 countries, offices in 32 countries. So if I put one of her staff in each of my offices, there was always someone to take the call, rebook a flight, and that poor CEO would never get stranded again. $170,000 was what it cost to set up that business in Chicago. Kathy turned a profit of $2.6 million at the end of her first year. She was, at one point, just my assistant. Now, CEO of an Iktara group company, earning 25% profit share of the business that she'd gone into. As you get bigger, as the size of your organization grows to a point where, as I said, you have 136 companies spread across 32 countries, employing 17,000 people of human capital, it becomes challenging to keep things the way you wanted them when you started out. For that, there's only one solution: culture. You know, when you think of a large corporate office, it conjures up images of these countless cubicles with staff slaving away, and the bosses hidden all the way at the back, or perhaps even on another floor, in these oak-paneled offices, guarded by an army of assistants. That's what you'd imagine when you think of a big corp. I have glass walls and a door that is always, always open. Everyone is welcome, and there's always enough hot coffee to go around. But that takes me to a story that I learned from a very dear friend of mine. His name is Steve Wynn. He's a hotelier, a bit of a gambler. He's the man who created the concept of the luxury casino in a place called Las Vegas. Steve owns more real estate in Las Vegas than anyone else, including Donald Trump. Steve Wynn's success story relies on his people. So he told me the story of this family that had driven in to stay at his hotel, and an elderly couple. And they checked into their suite, and the old lady proclaimed, Michael, you've left your diabetes medication behind." The couple was very distraught. So the bellman that had carried their luggage up to their suite said, well, hold on a minute, ma'am. It's okay. Can I help you? She said, no, this is prescription medication. If you don't get a prescription from my doctor back home, we won't be able to get this medication. So he said, well, where do you live? And she said, LA. And he said, well, that's 4 hours away. And I have a brother who lives in LA. So I'll tell you what, do you have a housekeeper or someone in your house? She said, yes. He said, okay, I'll get my brother to go and pick it up from your house. And then after my shift is over, I'll drive over 4 hours, drive back 4 hours, and by the time Mr. Michael wakes up in the morning, his diabetes medication will be here. Is that okay with you? So what did he do? He got in his car, he drove, he came back, and he didn't tell anyone where he went because it was his off time. And the next day he was back at work. He didn't do it for the recognition. He certainly didn't do it for the tip. He did it because that's the culture that Steve Wynn had created in his organization. A culture where, as I said, it's not just a hotel, it's not just a building of steel, glass, and concrete. It's a warm and inviting place, a place that only people can create. In my organization, I drive the culture. My people, they drive the experience. So what is business culture? For us, it's pride, passion, courage, integrity, and family. It takes a lot of pride. I was very proud when I saw my name up there, my company's name with it. That's pride. Every one of our employees is proud to be a part of the organization. Perhaps that's why in 8 years we have laid off and lost only 14% of our original employees in 8 years. Passion? Well, it takes a lot of passion to drive from South Bombay to be here today. I don't know if you know how far that is, but I realize today this is far. It takes passion to come to talk to you about what I've been through in my life. And I'm only 35, so I'm sure some of you will be able to relate to me in a few years. It takes passion to speak about your organization, to tell you the journey that we've been on, the stories of the things we've done right and wrong. But it also takes courage. It takes courage to stand up here and know that you're going to ask me questions at the end of this, and I'm going to have to tell you why we did what we did and how we did what we did or where I went along my journey. It takes courage. It also takes courage to build a successful business, because it's so much easier to go and get a job, right? But then you're guaranteeing yourself a life of mediocrity. Integrity, well, you can't survive without it. You have to be true to your people, to your partners. You can sleep at night knowing that nobody's going to come knocking on your door. And family, well, I think that encompasses it all. Every single one of us believes in being a part of a family. I told you about my office. That door's always open. You know, I have we all have calendars, right, on our phones. One of my phones has a calendar on it that has the birthdays of every single one of my employees. Every single one. And I don't just send them a standard copy-paste message on their birthday. No. I try and remember something about them, something must have told me at one point when I visited them somewhere in the world, something that's stored away in a little database, something that was personal. Someone had a baby, someone got married, someone lost someone. And when they get that personal message, well, that's what you do to family. And we live like a family. But, you can't have a family if you're not all in it together. Do you know what a firefly is? How many of you know what a firefly is? A jugnu. Yeah? It's a very interesting creature. Ever wondered? It's not like you and me. It doesn't need lights to be illuminated. You don't need to see it because of the external light. You see it because of its own light. It creates its own light. It's self-driven, self-motivated, self-ignited. Something very, very few of us are. But if there was one firefly, one jugnu flying around this room, would we notice? No, we wouldn't. One little guy? No, we wouldn't notice. You know what it takes to notice it? A swarm of them. It's when a swarm of fireflies flies through the night sky and lights it up. That's what you need to do with your people. That's what you need to do collectively. Be a swarm of fireflies that lights up the night sky, changes the way we look at things. Self-driven, self-motivated young people changing the face of India and the future of the world. A couple of years ago, we did something very interesting. We did an internship program. First time, perhaps the last. It's challenging when you invest a lot of time into people and then they go away. Kind of challenging. But this one very delightful young man came along in the internship program. And he said to me, he said, "Sir, I'm very surprised that you picked on me to do this job and you brought me into your organization." So I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, because nobody wants to give me a job." I said, "What have you done?" He said, "I tell the truth." I said, "Well, pray do tell." I was expecting something disastrous, questioning my own decisions. He said, "Well, when an employer asks me what I want to do in 5 years, I tell them I want to be an entrepreneur. I tell them the truth. Nobody gives me a job." I said, "Well, that's terrible. You have a job here." So he looks at me surprised. He said, "But why?" I said, "Well, because that's what I want. I want people who come up with brilliant ideas, grow the organization, grow the business, and then shoot off and either do something themselves or take my coattails and grow and make it bigger." That's how we created 136 companies in 8 years, because there were entrepreneurs within us. Once I created a project, a profit-sharing CEO came in and took over. And they report to me twice a year. You know, it's funny, I walked into an office of mine in Nairobi. Side story. Walked into an office of mine in Nairobi a couple of years ago. Unannounced. I was there on a family vacation. I thought I'd go and say hi. I had to Google Maps it because I didn't know where it was. And when I got there, nobody knew who I was. It's quite amusing. And then the receptionist made me wait for 20 minutes to see the boss. When the boss came out, because he was going for a smoke break, because she hadn't even told him that I was there, that was just a walk-in, someone, he freaked out. He almost fired the receptionist. I said, no, she's doing her job. She's not supposed to know who I am. Unlike the government of India, we don't put photos of me up on the walls in our offices. With all due respect to the present Prime Minister. So what happened with Uday? Uday did grow on to become a businessman. And he started a very successful chain of bed and breakfasts. Actually, he started hostels and then bed and breakfasts in Goa, which converted into hotels. And then he took that model, small hotels, and then he took that model and he took it to Rajasthan. That worked very successfully. But you know why I'm telling you this? Every single year, and as I said, I travel 26 days a month, right? So I'm a hard guy to keep a track of. Although Instagram's easy, but I'm still a hard guy to keep a track of. Every single year, no matter where I am in the world, on Teacher's Day, there will be a handwritten note from Uday in my hotel room. I don't know how he does it. And all he has to say is, "Thank you for being one of the greatest teachers and truly believing in me when no one else did." That's called driving your people to go beyond the boundaries of traditional business and traditional organizational practices. You know what they say, right? And I know you guys know this, actually not you guys, your parents know this better than anyone else. Everyone wants to be a part of a club that they cannot join. So create one. Create one. Create that club with your employees. Nobody will ever want to leave, and everyone will want to get in. Pride, passion, courage, integrity, family. It's so easy to say. I just did. But it's so hard to do. You know, I have a little sign in my office. It quotes something that Walt Disney once said. It's kind of fun to do the impossible, is what it says. But even the impossible takes persistence, perseverance, and it takes patience. But the truth is, if there was no such thing as patience, we wouldn't have any butterflies. I know you're all management students. I went to a pretty decent business school myself. Not like this, but it was pretty decent. You know where I learned the real lessons of what it takes to run a business? Not from my textbooks, from outside the classroom. So let's take, for the next 2 minutes, this wonderful theme of boundaries and apply it to something larger, a larger mandate, one that unites most of us in this room. I say most because there's a few non-Indians in the front. Let's talk about India. How do you come to grips with a land of such bewildering contrasts? The world's largest democracy? Well, we're also home to the ageless caste system. A land steeped in superstition and spirituality is a world leader in information technology. The nation of Mahatma Gandhi, the apostle of non-violence, is convulsed in periodic bloodletting. The paradoxes abound. In particular, one city, this one, Mumbai, seems to epitomize all of India's contradictions. This is India's commercial capital, the home of the country's main stock exchange. This city pays 38% of India's taxes. It manufactures the grandiose dreams of Bollywood, an industry I'm now a part of, which, mind you, makes 4 times as many films as Hollywood. It houses the country's most opulent hotels and boasts of commercial rents that are higher than Manhattan and Tokyo. It supports India's most innovative theaters and art galleries, but the contradictions in this city are astounding. A bottle of champagne at one of the city's many 5-star hotels sells for 1.5 times the national average annual income. But 40% of the city has no safe drinking water. The world's largest film industry thrives, but plumbing and law and order regularly break. The city is home to several hundred slimming clinics, but millions starve in filthy slums. India is a leading nuclear power, but 600 million Indians still have no access to electricity. Ours is a culture which elevated non-violence to an effective moral principle, but whose freedom was born in blood and whose independence still soaks in it. We're the world's largest manufacturer of generic medication for diseases such as AIDS. But we have 3 million of our own citizens without access to AIDS medication. Bollywood, as I said, makes 4 times as many films as Hollywood. But 170 million Indians cannot see them because they are blind. So yes, we are a land of paradoxes, and amongst these paradoxes is that so many of us speak about India as a great power in the 21st century. I do. When we are not yet able to feed, educate, and employ our own people. That's why we need businessmen like you, business people rather, like you. Young management students to come into the workplace, learn the ropes, and then go on and become entrepreneurs. And if someone asks me a question, I will talk about my IIM Ahmedabad story after this. Okay, so someone asked me that question. I don't want to break the flow. But India is more than the sum of its contradictions. It may be a country rife with poverty and pestilence, but it nonetheless moved a Mughal emperor to declaim, "If on earth there be a paradise of bliss, it is this, it is this, it is this." So the idea of India, to use my old professor Amartya Sen's phrase, is of one land embracing many. It is the idea that a nation may endure differences of caste, creed, color, culture, cuisine, conviction, costume, and custom, and still rally around a consensus. There exists a neighborhood in Calcutta where the wail of the mullah calling the Islamic faithful to prayer blends with the tinkling bells of a Buddhist monastery, infused with the chanting mantras of the Shiva temple, with the crackling loudspeakers outside the Gurdwara reciting verses from the Guru Granth Sahib, and St. Paul's Cathedral is right around the corner. That is a boundaryless India. The world's imagination was caught and admiration was won in May 2004 when a woman of Roman Catholic origin, Sonia Gandhi, made way for a Sikh Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, to be sworn in before a Muslim president, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, in a country that is 82% Hindu. That is a boundaryless India. Before I end, I'd like to share a short story, one that is very dear to my heart and was first told to me by my, as I said, dear friend, mentor, and thus far only boss, Shashi Tharoor. It's an age-old story from the Indian Puranas and a classic tale of a sage and his disciples. For those of you that have heard this, I apologize. I'm not as good as Shashi in retelling it. The sage says to his disciples, he says, "Tell me, when does the night end?" At dawn, of course. He says, "I know that. But when does the night end and the dawn begin?" The first disciple, who's from the southern part of India, says, "It's when the first streaks of sunlight show you the palms on the coconut trees swaying gently in the breeze. That's when the night ends and the dawn begins." The sage says, "Sorry, my son, you're wrong." He turns to the other disciple, who's from the north of India, who says, "I know the answer. It's when the first streaks of sunshine across the sky glint off the snow, glistening on the mountaintops. That's when the night ends and the dawn begins." The saint says, "No, my sons. It is when two travelers from the farthest corners of our land meet together and embrace as brothers. When they realize that they sleep under the same sky, see the same stars, and dream the same dreams. That is when the night ends and the dawn begins. Let us end the dark nights of boundaries in our organizations. Don't create boundaries for your people when you go into the workplace. Show them a boundaryless organization and let them soar. And let us together create a bright new dawn in business practices. Remember, an uncaged bird will always come home." Thank you very much. Do we have time for questions? Yeah, I know you would. I preempted that one. I knew that was coming. A couple of years ago, to my dismay, we were talking about entrepreneurship, and I asked the students there. Now, you've got to remember, IIM Ahmedabad is supposedly the country's premier business school, management school. They often compare it to Harvard and say it's the Harvard of India. It's a beautiful campus, great academics. But when I asked the students there, it was my class, I said, "How many of you aspire to be entrepreneurs?" Not a single hand went up. And I pushed them and I pushed them and I pushed them. And I finally said to them, I said, "Do you realize you are guaranteeing yourselves a life of mediocrity To which one student sheepishly put his hand up and said, "Sir, kam se kam wo guarantee to hai." Don't be like that. Go out there and create jobs for people. Create an establishment. You can start with one person. I did. And then take your idea, let it flourish and grow it into something exciting, something game-changing, something that you can be proud of standing up here about, something you can be passionate about, something that you had the courage to do, something that you had the integrity behind in everything you did, and go and create a little family of people that you can work with, that call you their own. It's the most gratifying feeling in the world. Go out there and do it. And then we'll talk about this in a couple of years when I'm sitting over there and you're up here. Anyone else before I go? Keep this very casual. Go on. What's your name? Sorry?
As you said that your internship program would be the last one that you would. I would actually like that you can initiate a particular internship program for especially those people who want to be entrepreneurs. Because we don't have such kind of approach. And when we really try to do something with our ideas and all, we don't get that conducive environment.
True.
So in this kind of initiative, your company...
I'll tell you what the problem with that is, Anju, and we've actually spoken about it, because what I've realized is I'd like to have more Kathys. You see, I'd like to have more... Please sit down, don't stay standing. I'd like to have more Kathys, people that grow from within my organization. When my people look at someone like Catherine, and they look at the journey that she's been on, and they look at the graph of her work that she's gone and done, they all say, I want to be like that. You know, I'll tell you another very interesting story. Many years ago, my father, when he was not starting his business, when he was recruiting some more people, he'd gone to a country called Uzbekistan and a city called Tashkent, and he wanted to hire some people from there. So the recruitment agent who was showing him, introducing him to people, the recruitment agent said, look, there's this one old lady. She bakes fantastic cakes. Would you like to take her along with you for some of your restaurants? And he said no, because we have a set formula all over the world. We do the same thing. It's a global business, and so we can't really be experimenting with new things here. It's a standard recipe. Any baker can do it, and I don't need her. So I still remember his name. His name was Sean, the agent, what do they call them? Recruitment person. There we go. So, sorry. And he said to Dad, he said, well, you must try her cakes. They're phenomenal. And Dad says, I don't eat cake. I don't even eat my own birthday cake. So I don't eat, you can make me eat it, but I won't know if it's good cake or bad cake. Well, she was more persistent than Sean, because she showed up outside Dad's hotel room one morning bearing cakes. And Dad is looking at these cakes in her hand and her sister's hand, and he's going, what have I gotten myself into? So he takes a spoon out of one of them and he says, this is very good. Thank you. I'm coming with you, she says. He didn't like that very much. Oh, relatively old lady, about 50. So at the time, I'm talking 15 years ago. So he said to her, how much do you earn? She said, $12 a month. He said, you know what, just come, because we're not going to pay you $12 a month, we'll pay you a lot more than that, but just come, because I can't leave you behind. That was it. That was the only reason why Dad took her along. So when he landed back in Dubai, the first thing he did was send me with her to the grocery store to go and experiment with cakes. She didn't speak a word of English other than I'm coming with you, and which she'd practiced a few times, clearly, because when you're in a country like Uzbekistan, that's not what a single man wants to hear, or a married man rather wants to hear. So, he brought her along, and he sent me along with her to the grocery store. But because she couldn't read the ingredients and didn't speak a word of English, we couldn't buy anything. We ended up buying salt before we bought sugar. We ended up making bread before we made cake. It's been 15 years. Lilia is still with us, hasn't left us. She now commands a staff of, I think, about 85 bakers under her, drives a little BMW around the city, and her daughter is currently studying in the south of France. She now earns $12,000 a month. Go create those.